Judges have been told to be trauma-informed when handing down judgments in a new manual commissioned by the New South Wales Judicial Watchdog and endorsed by the Australasian Institute of Judicial Administration. The guide's focus is on a postmodern legal concept called therapeutic jurisprudence. The goal is to make sure that consequences for breaking the law have a positive impact on the well-being of defendants. The manual, authored by lawyer and psychologist Dr. Rhonda Waterworth, gives guidance on how to handle cases involving defendants of certain backgrounds. For Indigenous Australians, it says they are still dealing with the pervasive intergenerational effects of settler colonialism, as well as the impact of successive generations of externally imposed government policies and discriminatory legislation which have marginalised, exploited, forced the removal of children and otherwise undermined First Nations communities. The legacy of trauma and dispossession is interconnected with other aspects of First Nations disadvantage, such as the disproportionately high incarceration rates. The guide also tells judges to look to the clear moral and ethical guidelines of the Islamic faith when dealing with Muslim defendants, as the religion has a strong principle of justice that focuses on reconciliation and making amends rather than mere punishment. This approach can facilitate the healing process for both offenders and victims, fostering a sense of accountability and personal growth. Indeed, there is a whole section devoted to encouraging judges to consider aspects of the Islamic faith, including this on Muslim defendants having a sense of personal responsibility to react to world events in the context of religious injunctions to support others of the same faith. Goodness me. Joining me now for more on this is Senior Fellow at the Menzies Research Centre, Nick Cater. Nick, this 200-page guidebook is endorsed by the country's peak judicial body. Is it going to enhance or undermine the public's faith in the justice system?
Well, I think you know the answer to that, Rita, and I'll come to that in a minute. First, I think we've got to unpick this mumbo-jumbo one piece at a time, haven't we? If there's any literature, any studies, any peer-reviewed evidence of intergenerational trauma to show how this is somehow passed down over multiple generations, so that somebody is traumatised today because of a bad incident that might have happened to their long-distance ancestor, then let's put it on the table, because right now I don't think there is any such evidence, so that whole idea of intergenerational trauma is just a complete made-up furphy. I'm sorry to say that, but that's what it is. On this other question of whether we should, judges should take account of Islamic morality or whatever it may be, well, they might want to do that in their spare time. If you want to study Islamic history or something, go ahead. But you're there in a different capacity. You're there to enforce the law, the Australian law, and you're there to do it according to the rule of law, which means that everybody gets treated absolutely equally. And I think the idea here is you give special treatment to at least two categories of people that we've mentioned, possibly more, because I dare say some of the other people in that intersectional district get some mention somewhere. But I think this is very dangerous. I think everybody should be able to go into court and have their case treated on its own merits according to the law, not according to some made-up stuff.
This just seems to be ideological idiocy, and you nailed it there. You're supposed to be equal before the law regardless of who you are, what your background. You're supposed to be treated the same. It's supposed to be a pillar of our justice system, and that seems to be an old-fashioned view these days. Now, let's go to Queensland. The LNP there is finally standing for something. This is nice to see. Opposition leader David Crisafulli is promising to scrap Queensland's truth-telling and healing inquiry if the coalition do win the upcoming state election. The inquiry's chair, Joshua Creamer, has said this would be a significant step backwards for reconciliation, and it will keep Queensland's true history hidden. Nick, I think it was around more than 68% of Queenslanders who voted no in the race-based referendum. it's about time that politicians listen to them.
Yeah, it's taken David Crisafulli, almost a year to catch up on this, and thank goodness he has. But I mean, truth-telling commissions, Rita, you and I would be absolutely in favour of any commission that would actually tell the truth about our history, about our past, warts and all, good sides, bad sides. But we know that's not what we're going to get from this truth commission. That's not what they're there to do. They're there to further distort our history, to tell us how bad our ancestors were, what a terrible country this is, instead of pointing out that it's actually the best country on earth and that the Aboriginal people have the same rights as everybody else. That's just the fact.
And David Crisafulli has also vowed to keep Queensland's coal-fired power stations open indefinitely, and this is to ensure there is reliable and affordable energy during the transition to renewables. Nick, I'm glad he's keeping the coal-fired power stations open, but is he going to embrace nuclear power, or is he going to persist with this renewable fantasy?
One step at a time, Rita. Come on, one baby step at a time. This is a very important thing that he's done. It's obvious, and we need this here in New South Wales as much as anything, because we can habitually run short of power, and the renewable nonsense, which is just ripping apart beautiful parts of native bushland and farmland in Queensland, has to stop. It has to stop the moment he gets into office. He needs to put a complete stop on it and a review. And then, of course, inevitably, you get to nuclear. If you think, as we seem convinced, that we have to keep our electricity supply 100% carbon-free, then there is only one option for baseload carbon-free power, and that's nuclear. And he will come round to that, just as Microsoft has, and the United States government under even Joe Biden has, to realise that it's not a question of if, it's inevitable if you want to keep the lights on.
It's disappointing how long it's taking to come to these very obvious positions, particularly for someone who's supposed to be leading a centre-right coalition. Now, former Labor Senator, she's now an independent, Fatima Payman, has launched her political party with the help of the preference whisperer, Glenn Drury, who's now her chief of staff. But a decision to name the party Australia's Voice has sparked outrage within some activist circles. Some have accused her of rebranding the Voice for her own agenda. Indigenous entrepreneur Sean Gordon said that the use of the term voice by Fatima Payman for her new political party is a further attempt by the pro-Palestinian movement to leverage off the back of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And Uluru Dialogue co-chair Megan Davis described Senator Payman's announcement as curious timing, given it's the anniversary of the referendum and many of our people are still grieving. Nick, I do hate it when the lefties turn on each other.
Yeah, I don't mind the voice part, but it's the Australian part that I don't like. Australian Voice. It should be called the un-Australian Voice, judging from some of the things that Senator Payman has said in Parliament. But she's having trouble, isn't she? And I thought there were some very interesting and very considered points made by some of the critics from the Indigenous community, saying that they're sick of the Indigenous, the Aboriginal cause being hijacked by the Palestinians. That's what the Palestinians have done. They've attempted to draw some moral equivalence between the ills that are supposedly happening to them and the ills happening to the Indigenous people. No, they're nothing at all to do with it. She's going to have trouble establishing this party, isn't it? It's going to be the party of one, I think, the way it's going.
Well, we'll see how she goes, but if you've ever gone along to any of those pro-Palestinian protests, you'd see that messaging is very, very prevalent, tying what's happening in Israel and Gaza with what's happening in Australia and saying those causes are very similar. That's a topic for another day. And Nick Cato, thank you for your time this evening.